Hello, I'm Louis Metzger, and I'm the director of the Institute for Cultural Engagement, New Wine, New Wineskins. Welcome to New Wine Tastings. I'm here with my good friend and colleague, Pastor Tom Schiave. Tom is the lead pastor at Gateway Church in Portland, and we're going to be dealing with the subject of disabilities related to architecture and use of church space. Tom, I think you can learn a lot about what a church values by their architecture and also by how they use their space.
Yep.
And I think that pertains to the subject of disabilities too. Mm-hmm. So I would like to know from you what your church has been doing, because it's quite striking to me, about what your church has been doing related to disabilities as it pertains to your architecture and your renovations related to accessibility.
Yeah, Gateway Church was built back in the 1960s, and it was built pretty much along the lines of just get things done, get bathrooms done, get a lobby done, get a facility done where people could come and worship, but there was no thought for disabilities actually. I mean, if you look at the facility right now, it is a very uninviting place. We just had a New Wine, New Wineskins conference called Isolation to Invitation, and Gateway's an isolating facility when it came to disabilities. And so when I first got there, I looked around and saw just the unavailability of the facilities to those who are disabled, to those who may have physical challenges, and I said, we've got to do something about this. So this has been actually an 8-year project that we have been working on, and we have been changing over and over again to make it more inviting and accessible. And so we're adding on a brand new lobby at Gateway, which will be ground level so that people with disabilities can come in on the ground level. We are adding on...
so there's an elevator?
There's an elevator in the building. There'll be ADA bathrooms. Right now the bathrooms in the building are not ADA accessible. In fact, this is such a tragedy. If you are a person who is limited to a mobile wheelchair or something of that nature, you would have to go outside the building. So you have to go outside, down an outside ramp, around the parking lot and into a whole nother building to go to the restroom. So the accessibility is just telling. It's horrible. And
this is coming from the lead pastor.
Yeah, and it's coming from the lead pastor, I'm telling you. In fact, it's funny, Paul, because remember when I spoke at the conference, as I was going through the slides that I was putting up there about where we are now and where we're going, when we were at the point of where we are now, I was sitting in my mind going, this is horrible. This is the most ridiculous facility I've ever seen. I mean, I was sitting up there stunned by how we've been able even to function at Gateway for all these years without it.
And yet, people who have disabilities that make it impossible for them to have good access, they weren't able to really function all that well, right? And
no.
we're often blind. We don't struggle that we don't know people who have disabilities that keep them from ascending stairs or what have you. It's very difficult for us to even have it on our radar. What led to the church making this move? And I know you're in the process of building now, correct? You have the designs, you're in the process.
We're going to put the shovel in the ground in August, and we're moving all of our worship into the ministry center, so we're ready to go. We've got the resources. Well, I think there are two key things. One, Gateway has always had a heart for the disabled. Years and years ago, before I got to Gateway had a very large ministry to people with children of Down syndrome, one of the largest in the Portland area. And it was started by Chuck and Ruth Williams, who had a son named Charlie, and they just had a real heart for it. And since that time, God has just been bringing more and more individuals to our campus who struggle with disability, Down syndromes, some mental challenges. More and more people have come. So I think Gateway has always had a real heart and an embracing spirit when it comes to that, except they just didn't have the facilities. Mm-hmm. And that's the problem. You know, we have the heart, but we don't have the practical facilities. Mm-hmm. But I think a second factor than that, if I can be honest, was a new set of eyes. When I came to Gateway 10 years ago, I noticed it right away. I mean, even while I was candidating there and at the invitation to be their pastor, I walked around the facilities and I noticed immediately the lack of accessible facilities for the
What gave you that awareness? What led you over the years to that? Because I think I probably would just walk into a church building or the facilities of a church and be pretty clueless on matters myself.
Yeah.
So what trained you to think that way? Were you always that way?
Yeah, I think part of it is I've always had a really deep heart to want to minister to everyone and to make facilities available. And part of it was my heart. And I always go into a facility and say, well, this looks great, but who does it eliminate or who does it prevent from being invited to the facility? And secondly, it was just a new set of eyes to look around. I've always been one who said, we need to have a church that's available to everybody. And I have a tendency to be a person who kind of is a renewal pastor. And some of the things I look for are not only organism issues, the love and the spirit of the congregation and how the people function, but organizational issues. What aspects of the church are preventing the church organizationally? And that goes from finances to organizational structures to how they are aligned in their constitution. I always look at those things to see if they're accessible, free, and inviting.
And that would include the space.
Oh, it's the space all the way.
Well, you know, if we think about corporate America or just even a shopping mall, for example, they're very attentive to space.
Yes.
And look at how you go into a department store and you find mirrors, no clocks. They're very conscious of what they're doing. Certain kind of music,
wide aisles,
ambiance. So they're very intentional, and space matters, and it should matter for churches too. How has the response been on the part of congregants, especially those with disabilities, with what you're doing?
Well, there's a genuine excitement. I mean, there's a real excitement among our people, and I think that comes across in our capital stewardship campaign that we began 3 years ago, called Living Our Faith, Building Our Future. And this was designed to provide this new lobby, this sacred space, and this accessibility to people with disabilities. Right now, our people are going to the ministry center, and we're live streaming our services into the ministry center so that they have access to our services. But it's isolating. They're
not able to be with everyone.
They're not able to be with everybody. So there's a real isolation there, and they're chomping at the bit to really get out there and wanting to be a part of it. We've just completed this. In fact, we'll complete our final year in our Living Our Faith Stewardship campaign, and we have received over $1.2 million from our body.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, the people have given. We have all the resources and cash to do this. So people were ready, and they were excited, and they wanted to see this project, and they're voting with their enthusiasm. They're also voting with their resources, and they're excited. We are ready to go.
Tom, you know, I'm reminded of a story you had shared with me related to Lord's Supper or baptism. I think it was baptism.
It was baptism, yeah.
And it's not just our access for people in terms of facilities, but also matters of rites of passage, like baptism.
Yeah.
And you had shared a story with me about a family in your church where they had had experiences where one of their children had significant disabilities, and if I'm not mistaken, they were never able to have their child baptized. Could you speak to that issue and what happened at your church and what that meant for this family?
Yeah. I hope I can talk about this without tearing up. I'm already thinking about it, which troubles me, but it's where I come from. We had a discovery dinner, and our discovery dinner is our membership kind of thing where people can come and meet people and explore Gateway and what we have. And one of the parents of a disabled young man named Brian asked me in the discovery dinner, "Would you baptize my son?" And I said to them, "Well, why wouldn't I?" And they just started sobbing. They said, "We've been to 3 or 4 other churches and they won't let us baptize our son Brian.
Why is that?
Because they felt that, number one, there was an access, but more importantly, they just felt like he was unable to understand fully the gospel.
And what was the issue with Brian? Maybe you articulated that, but...
Well, the issue with Brian is that he's severely mentally challenged, and he's got some disabilities, and they felt he didn't fully understand what it meant to be a Christian. But I said...
Because he couldn't articulate it.
Because he couldn't articulate it the way that everybody else thought about it. And my point was, he articulates it enough. He confesses Jesus as his Lord and Savior and calls himself a Christian. What more does he have to do? But the churches were so inaccessible to them in that area. They just sobbed when I told them that we would baptize them. They just sobbed. And Brian, the father said to me, that's one of the reasons I've come to Gateway. There's an accessibility for everyone at Gateway. Mm-hmm. And we not only baptized Brian, but we let his father do it, which was really, really special. I mean, and when Brian got in the tank, it was precious, it was priceless. It's one of the best memories I have of ministry when he got in the tank. So, that family had accessibility to the rites of passage. And to me, this is what the church is about. Too often we want to be morally right, or we end up, flaunting, these things above, a young man who really wanted in his own way to talk and display his love for Jesus. And does he know everything you know? And I know, of course not, but he knows enough. And boy, I just wept in the service. It still bothers me. Because it's such a great, beautiful visual of Jesus accepting everybody.
It is a painful and powerful story.
Yeah.
A redemptive story.
Yeah, it's very redemptive.
Tom, what closing thoughts do you have for us here on New Wine Tastings regarding disabilities, accessibility, moving from isolation to invitation and participation?
Yeah, first I would hope that churches would develop a heart for the disabled. I hope that they would see that these would be the very people that Jesus would reach out to. Jesus would touch them. And we may not be able to touch them with the healing power of Jesus, but we can touch them with the love of Jesus. And so we can touch them that way. And I would hope that churches would truly do a little bit of an assessment of their facility. We have a safety team at Gateway that walks around our facility regularly and finds areas that are, first of all, not accessible to those who have disabilities, and then finds areas that are unsafe for people. And I think churches ought to really look around and say, what does this say to people who have these kinds of physical or perhaps mental challenges? What does our facility say about that? And invest in making those changes. People will invest in mission, but mission doesn't have to be overseas. It can be right over your fence, right over your lobby, where you should be really looking at how are we reaching people right here. I know there's a lot of emphasis, Paul, on live streaming and people having accessibility to the services. We live stream our services, we're on YouTube, but that's not the same as having people sit in a worship service and enjoy the sense of God's presence. It's just not, it's not the same. It's not right to isolate them in their home.
And also I think, as you have that safety team and the like,
yeah.
I would assume you're asking people, you might even have on that very team, people with disabilities or people in your congregation that you're listening to who have disabilities, so that you're learning from them to see with their eyes and hear with their ears, so to speak, where those points of inaccessibility or places of inaccessibility are. And I think we need that full participation in the life of the body, learning from one another. And so Tom, Pastor Schiave, thanks so much. This is Pastor Tom Schiave of Gateway Church in Portland. I'm Louis Metzger. Thank you for joining us for New Wine Tastings.